So this is my Unit 5, Lesson 18, culminating multimedia presentation. I am running a bit short on time, so what I'll be doing is just a quick 4 to 5 minute video essay, or video monologue, I guess. It will be outlining my essay. The topic of my essay is American essayist, novelist, painter, poet, Edward Estlin Cummings, better known as E.E. Cummings. Um, so I'll just jump right into it. For my intro, my little artistic hook right at the beginning, I found this really good quote when I was researching. The quote goes, "Unbeing dead isn't being alive." And I don't know why, but that just stuck with me, and I decided I wanted to use it for my intro. It's a very E.E. Cummings quote because it doesn't really make sense. It's got a made-up word in there, and it's kind of hard to decipher. So I think my first little artistic introduction will be, answering or asking some questions about that quote. It's like, was he trying to say that simply existing does not qualify as living? Was he trying to comment on the population being in like an undead state, or was he simply spouting nonsense like many critics think he did all the time? So yada yada yada. I'll jump to my thesis. So my thesis is next, of course, God, America, I, L parentheses A, and I like my body when it is with your, are poems that illustrate how Cummings' early work was influenced by his experience in World War I, how his unique and contemporary style of writing contributed to the meaning of his poems, and the influence he had on the discussion of topics such as love in poetry. So my first paragraph will be about the influence that Cummings' time in France during World War I and in his in prison, the 4 months he spent in prison in France, how these events impact him and led to his first novel, which is called The Enormous Room. So in this paragraph, I'll talk a little bit about Cummings' personal life. I will talk about his enlistment, his time spent in France, his arrest, and his eventual 4 month stay in a French prison. I will then talk about the poem. So I'll talk about the poem now. So the poem is next, of course, God, America, I, which is one of his most famous poems. It is a critique on the government. It is a critique on the war, and it is unlike any poetry coming out at that time because of its dark and its depressing depiction of war and kind of the way it demonizes the government a little bit. So no one was really doing that at that time, so that's what I'll focus on for my analysis for my first paragraph. For my second paragraph, I will look at Cummings' unique writing style and how that helped emphasize and contextualize the meaning of his poems. So in this, I have a really good quote that I like from Cummings. It is, "So far as I'm concerned, poetry and every other art was and is and forever will be strictly and distinctly a question of individuality. Nobody else can be alive for you, nor you can be alive for anybody else." So I really love this quote. It pretty much summarizes all of Cummings' thoughts into one nice quote. And then I will talk about the actual writing style itself. I will analyze the poem L parentheses A, which is read as "A leaf falls in loneliness." He makes use of the typewriter here and his unique and contemporary style to emphasize the theme of the poem, which is all of Cummings' poems are very, like, not all, but most of Cummings' poems are very abstract and a bit hard to decipher. So the way this is laid out on the page will be a big factor in the theme of the poem and stuff. It's not necessarily about the content, it's more about the presentation. And in my final paragraph, I will look at, what will I look at in my final paragraph? I will look at the influence Cummings had on other contemporary works of art and future works of art, specifically poetry, and specifically in topics such as race, religion, and the big one is love. You know, it's the roaring 20s. Girls are expressing their individuality in some interesting ways, and it's not helped by the big what's it called, the big ban, the big, censorship of everything, all sexual innuendo and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk about how Cummings influenced the themes of love in his poem. His one of his most famous poems called "I Like My Body When It Is With Your." Very sensual poem without being degrading or condescending or even vulgar, really. So he paved the way for a lot of interesting topics in terms of that, and his writing style, is his expression of individualism, is definitely still felt in poetry today. So that will do it for my third paragraph. In my conclusion, I'm just going to state my thesis again, and then probably just wrap it up with something pretty generic, like, his influence is still being felt today. Like, we have him to thank for so much stuff. Just stuff like that. So I think that's it. And yeah, Edward Estlin Cummings, World War I forever.